In this unit, we'll discuss market structures. Specifically, we'll concentrate on four. We have the perfect competition, we have the monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and monopoly. As you go upwards, you discover that these market structures are more competitive and hence demand is more elastic. As you go downwards, you discover that these ones are less competitive and demand for such is inelastic. So the four market structures we'll discuss, we'll start with the perfect competition. Under a perfectly competitive market structure, we have very large number of small firms that compete against each other. In this scenario, a single firm does not have significant market power, and as such, these are price takers. As a result, the industry as a whole produces socially optimal level of output because none of these firms influence the market prices. So the idea of perfect competition builds amongst the following assumptions. Number one, all firms would want to maximize their profits, both in the short and the long run. There is free entry and exit in this market. All firms sell completely identical items. We use the term homogeneous. A very good example of such a market structure is a common market where agricultural produce is sold. Here, there are no consumer preferences. By looking at these assumptions, it becomes even more obvious that in this market structure, you are hardly ever able to find perfect competition in actual sense. So this market structure has other characteristics that are summarized in the table below. Many buyers and sellers, easy entry and exit. There are no product differentiation because the goods are ideally the same. These ones are epitomized by a horizontal demand curve, and as such, these are price takers. These small firms that are part of this market structure don't influence the market so much as a whole, and demand is very elastic. Because of perfect information, everyone knows how much each good must cost, and so they make only a normal profit in the short run. There is little or no government intervention. These are price takers. These are price takers. So there is perfect mobility of the resources, and economic agents have perfect knowledge. It's well known how much this must cost. An example also could be a stock market. When we go to a monopolistic competition, examples are companies in Zambia like Trade Kings and Unilever, where we have many sellers and buyers. The goods are differentiated, and we use the term heterogeneous. There is perfect mobility of resources. Examples that we can look at are fast foods. We have restaurants here that differentiate their goods by their offering. So in this market structure, the demand is down sloping and slightly or quite elastic in the long run. There are SMEs in this market structure, and demand is elastic. They make a normal profit in the short run. There's minimum government intervention, and they have some power in pricing because of the differentiation. We'll talk about the caves and how they look later on. We'll go to another market structure, which is an oligopoly. In an oligopoly, we have few sellers and buyers who merge to form what is called a collusion or a cartel. In this market structure, goods are both highly heterogeneous or homogeneous. They're highly differentiated or identical. There are huge barriers to entry. Examples could be automobile manufacturers. Now, in this market structure, decisions are interdependent. No one makes a decision on their own. The demand curve is down sloping and it's actually kinked. It is elastic and inelastic at the same time. These few large firms that form a cartel have powers to determine how much to produce and to whom in what quantities. The demand is quite it's elastic, and government intervention is unregulated. In terms of price setting, they have medium to high price setting abilities, and there are heavy barriers to entry. We go to another market, which is a monopoly. In a monopoly, we have a single seller and many buyers. For you to be monopoly, there should be no close substitute for the product. It can't be a monopoly and there are many others that are selling the commodity you're selling. There are significant barriers to entry. There are huge barriers to entry in the sense that there's control of the essential input, there are patent copyrights, there are economies of scale for a natural monopoly, and the government franchise. For instance, a post office, a utility company like Zesco. Now let's go into how price is determined in a perfectly competitive market. Because of the forces of demand and supply, the invisible hand in the perfectly competitive market is what determines the price. So the forces of demand and supply at equilibrium produce the price, which is the same as the demand. It is the marginal revenue. So this is how price is determined in a perfectly competitive market. At equilibrium, quantity demanded must be equal to quantity supplied. So in an instance where we're given two equations, the demand which has 625 minus 5p, the supply which has 175 plus 5p. So when we equate these two, we put the like terms together. 165 minus 175 is 450, 5p plus 5p is 10. So equilibrium here will give us 45. This is the 45 that we are talking about here. This is our price demand function. To find the equilibrium quantity, we substitute the 45 in any of these two to get 400. So this is a 400 that we are talking about here at equilibrium. So for a perfectly competitive market in the short run, the firm's demand curve is actually the market price, which is the same as the marginal revenue. In the short run, the firm's supply curve is actually the marginal cost, where the marginal cost is above the average variable cost as shown below. So in a perfectly competitive market, the marginal cost is greater than the average cost. So this is our demand at 45. We have the average total cost and the marginal cost function. Profit is maximized when the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost at point E. You drop your equation down there. Where it touches the average total cost, we draw our equation, our line there. So this blue area is what we call our normal profit in the short run. So when the average total cost in the short run begins going up, there's a point where the firm must shut down. We call the shutdown rule. You and I have participated in this perfectly competitive market, especially ladies who have engaged in sale of homogeneous goods like handbags, perfumes. In the short run, they make their economic profits, where a few people who are available to sell. When everyone hears that it's happening with perfumes, they all want to flood the market. When they flood the market, the profit begins depleting until a point where the average total cost exceeds our average variable costs. So when it exceeds there, we now make what we call an economic loss in the brackets B, C, E, F. So shutdown will occur when our average total cost sits on the marginal revenue function. So in the long run, under a perfectly competitive market, quantity is set by the firm so that short run, the price is equal to the marginal cost, which is equal to the average total cost. At the same time, in the long run, the price is equal to the marginal cost, which is equal to the average cost, where economic profit is zero. So that point is what we call the shutdown. So the long run curve here, where your expenses no longer exceed your revenues, you stop producing, further to which you are now going to make what we call economic losses. So this is how a perfectly competitive market really looks like. When we go to a monopoly, we've said you should be the only available seller of that commodity without any close substitutes. So these make what we call supernormal or abnormal profits in the short run. So the demand curve for the firm is a market demand under the monopoly. So the firm will produce quantity at Q. The marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost to maximize the profit. So likewise, this is how the short run equation looks like in a monopoly. This is our average revenue, and half of the average revenue is our marginal revenue. The demand is the average revenue. Half of this is our marginal revenue. How do we maximize profit? When the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. At this point here, you draw our line. So the average total cost, we draw our blue shading. This is what we call the abnormal profit. In the long run, this is how the curve looks like. So for a monopolist, we have many sellers, many buyers. They have differentiated goods. This is what gives them power to navigate around the pricing. These ones are limited monopoly power. Their slope is downsloping, and they usually increase their market share by competitors, causing a decrease in demand for the firm's product. So it's slightly similar to a monopoly, but you can see here our demand, which is our average revenue, is above the marginal revenue. Also, the point where the marginal cost and the marginal revenue meet, this is the profit maximizing point. We'll go on top where to meet the average total cost. This is where they make their economic profits in the short run. And this is our long run equation for a monopolistic market. So we now go to an oligopoly. Here we have few sellers of a product. This is a market that is heavily characterized by what we call price discrimination. There are heavy barriers to entry. When we only have two, we call it a duopoly. A pure oligopoly has a homogeneous product, a similar product. A differentiated oligopoly has differentiated products. Okay, so sources of oligopoly. Number one, they have economies to scale. To have economies to scale is to be economically stable. Gave an example of Zambia Sugar. Zambia Sugar had economies to scale, such that for a long time it had been a monopoly in the country, the only one producing sugar. To some extent that other firms that would have wanted to join the market, Zambia Sugar had the power to reduce even the price of sugar to as low as 1 kwacha because of the other byproducts it had. To an extent, to make the others make a loss because of the byproducts it has, like molasses, bagasse, and the power that they supply. So if you have economies of scale, you're economically stable, you have substitute, you have the power of complementary goods. There's large capital investment involved. You have patented brand loyalty, you have control over raw materials, there's government franchise, and there's limit pricing involved here. So in this market structure, we will need to understand a Kuhnert model that is mainly examined, where two firms will produce identical products, and you'll be asked to calculate the price and quantity at the kink. So under a monopoly, an oligopoly, since decisions are interdependent, firms will agree how much will be produced at what price, to whom, at what period. So within their kinked curve, if an oligopoly raises the price, the other firms will not follow, so that demand will be elastic. If an oligopoly lowers their price, the other firms will follow, so that demand will be elastic. They'll go far below him to put him off the market. This is what we call the implication of the curve that will be kinked. So it has both the elastic and inelastic attribute. Here it is elastic, here it is inelastic. So if the firm decides to charge higher, they'll leave them, so that they're what? Makes a loss. If it goes below them, they have two characteristics. They're able to be elastic and inelastic at the same time. This is what we call the marginal revenue gap. So this is how an oligopolistic market shows its kinked curve. So cartels are characterized in this market structure, where they cooperate amongst themselves to restrict competition in order to increase their profit. This is the reason why there are usually fluctuations in prices of fuel time and again. So it's because of the cartels that are involved in the market of oil production. So in the cartels is what we call market sharing. They will divide their markets and will decide who produces for who. There is a centralized cartel where there is a formal agreement amongst the members to set up monopoly price to restrict output. This is why there is war between America and the Middle East, because of the power that is possessed in oil production, because there is so much power that is imbued in cartels. So in the cartels, there's who we call a price leader. This is the largest dominant or lowest cost firm in the industry. Here, the market leader will be the one whom the market followers will set prices after. For instance, Nigeria being one of the greatest market producers for oil. So being the market leader, he will give, or she will give, instructions as to what could be the best price to sell, for which the other firms should follow. So there's interdependence in pricing. The efficiency of an oligopolistic market, here price is usually greater than long run average cost. The quantity produced usually does correspond to the minimum long average cost. Price is usually greater than the long run marginal cost. And when a differentiated product is produced, there's too much may be spent on advertising and model changes. Now, this is where the models in the theories of the firm are now exhibited. The sales maximization model that was discussed earlier, where managers seek to maximize sales. This model simply asserts that firms exist to maximize their sales. So sales are maximized when the marginal revenue is equal to 0. At this point here, there's a contention to say, is the sales maximization point also the profit maximization point? So sometimes the point at which you maximize your sales may not be the point at which you maximize your revenue. So this is where we end regarding the market structures. Our next session will be on game theory, so that we understand a prisoner's dilemma on how the players in game theories interact. At this point, I'll end the session. Unless there are any questions, please ask now.